My background is in journalism, and I've been working at a film archive now for the past 8 years, and that exposed me to a lot of things about my mother after she had passed away that I didn't know about. By the time I was born, my mother's career had taken her to Hollywood. She was exhibiting films here at Sundance. She had produced films here. She had directed films that came through here. And so that was the side of her that I knew. And then I started working at the archive, and I was seeing these interviews with her. I was seeing her early activism work, and I was finding out all these amazing things about her that I never knew as the baby of the family. And so I kind of put together a little bit of a tribute package for her. It was real short, and it got the attention of Cliff over here. And he saw it, and he contacted me about a couple months later, and he told me, "Happy, I'm starting a production company, and I want one of the first projects to be about your mum. And if you don't want to do it, I'm not going to do it." And so for me, it was like basically like The Godfather, an offer you can't refuse. And naively, I was like, "Cool, yeah, let's do this. I'd love to do this project." And then that took me on a journey that I was really naive going into, and it exposed me to things about my mother and things about my family dynamic that I never knew about. I remember talking to one of my brothers in an interview with him, and he was saying, "I've never spoken about this to anybody before." And so, yeah, that was the start of a really amazing personal journey for me.
I first met Merata in Hollywood, actually. Early in my career, I was on my way to Cannes with one of my films, and so it was this inspiration because she's from this very small village from where I'm, same tribe, and she gave me a sense of context in terms of being indigenous, being Maori, and having a global presence and being a global citizen. So she was very inspirational to me in that regard. And then also when I started producing, I did the producers program here at Sundance, and I come here with a couple of films as well, Whale Rider, etc. And she was here again, and so I reconnected with her, and she became a mentor in earnest. Now she really was my mentor as a producer, and she helped me very much when I formed my first production company with my cousin Ainsley Gardner and Taika Waititi, and we produced some films together then. And as I got to know her, I got to know all these things about her that Happy talks about, her activism, her personal sacrifices, and I became fascinated by her as a person and as an artist. And so I quietly started to work away on the idea of making a feature film about her early life. And then she passed away suddenly. And then I saw this tribute to her by Happy, and it just struck me like a bolt. And I was setting up my second production company, and I knew that this was the first feature that I wanted to come out of the company because she was such a firebrand, and I knew straight away that Happy, intuitively I knew Happy was the person to do it. Apart from that, he had journalism. Apart from the fact that he worked in an archive. I just intuited that in our culture, the youngest child is given certain gifts. It's called a Portuguese. Maui, the famous Maui, he's the youngest child. So there's a tradition that certain obligations are taken up by the older children, but the youngest child is often given certain gifts. And I just sort of viewed him in that way, and I thought he was quite exceptional and the right person for the job. Secondarily to that, I thought, well, Chelsea is a great producer, of course, and she was producing the last production that Merata worked on when she passed away, and so and she's far more competent than I am in many areas of producing, and so yeah, that was a part of that part. So I'll hand it off to you, Chelsea.
Yeah, I became involved in the film because, well, I was working with her, as Cliff mentioned, when she passed away suddenly. So that was for everybody really, and a huge shock for the community back home and around the world, actually, the Indigenous filmmaking community. And then it wasn't until a few years later that these two kind of said, "Hey, we want to meet up for a coffee." I was in Wellington at the time. I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'd love to catch up. Cool." And they basically just sat me down and said, "You have to produce this." I was like, "Oh." But of course, it was a no-brainer. She was such a mentor to me, and She was an incredible filmmaker, a mother. She was doing so many things for women, and she was just such an inspiration. So I absolutely had to say yes, and it's been probably the most rewarding production I've ever done.
It's funny, when you grow up with that type of context, you don't really know that anything special is going on. You take for granted the opportunities that you're given. I grew up, I've been to Sundance maybe 4 or 5 times now. This is my first time with the film, but before I was just tagging along with my mum. I thought it was normal, you know what I mean? And not only was that apparent in her filmmaking and what she did and her craft, it was also in her politics. Everything was just part of the upbringing experience. Nothing was really singled out as this is what I do, I'm on a mission. It was just, this is who I am, you're my son, and you're coming along for the ride with me. You know what I mean? And so it took me a while after she passed away to really process the magnitude of what she had done and what she had achieved. But not only that, where she came from and the struggles she had to go through to achieve the things that she did achieve. And a lot of that for me was almost like a coming of age to actually understand that journey. I came from a very privileged background, being the youngest. By that time, she had firmly established her reputation. People such as Cliff and Chelsea, award-winning filmmakers, were people coming around the house regularly. They were like they were my friends, they were my mum's friends. It was just so natural. It was just such a normal part of her life that it's really hard for me to single out any sort of specific, explicit filmmaking type of advice that she may have given me. But now when I look back on it, it was the entire journey, the entire experience. You couldn't take the filmmaker, you couldn't take the activist, you couldn't take the mother out of her. It was all part of one package, and that's the way she lived. And that's the way I was brought up. So although I can't pinpoint any, it's hard for me to pinpoint any real specific things. It was just seeing that, breathing it, living it, and that was all part of it, and that was what guided me in this whole process.
I suppose she was quintessentially a person who spoke for those that couldn't speak for themselves. That was her mission in life. Whether it be children or women or Indigenous peoples, that was clearly her mission in life. She would in the documentary you'll hear her quoted as saying things, then if I don't do this, then if I don't speak to this issue, speaking truth to power, etc., then who will? And she was a true firebrand in that sense, and quintessentially, essentially, that's I think her greatest gift that I understand it. Now, in terms of the documentary, there were 3 different possible documentaries to be made, and it was a long journey. One was the objective, sort of classical kind of documentary, linear, start with the beginning, work your way through. The other one is the filmmaker. There was enough material that it could have been made in her own voice, just her speaking about her work and her experiences. And then the third possibility, which is what the film turned out to be, is the most intimate, is a child discovering his relationship with his mother anew after her passing. It's a very emotional journey, and acknowledging the sacrifices she made for herself, her children, her family, in the pursuit of speaking truth to power, and giving voice to those who had no possibility of having a voice of their own.